A worried wife when her husband suddenly goes missing. He was always reliable, never left without telling her. The fact that he didn't answer his phone made her sure something was terribly wrong. He would never leave her, unless something horrific had happened. Stepping into the apartment, a strong smell of bleach hit her nose. Everything was in disarray, out of place. And then, when a body turned up, the police had to dig deeper into the investigation right near their home. The story of Mr. Lazy was her finest work, but did it have anything to do with the case? The relationship between the four of them was far from peaceful. As evidence gradually surfaced, the suspect was cornered, forced to give answers. The gruesome details of the victim's final moments came to light. He never anticipated the sudden attack of a samurai sword raised in the dark. He thought he could judge who was good and who was bad, but it turned out he was the one eliminated in the most brutal way. On the night of April 21, 2008, in the small town of Stuart, Florida, the police received an urgent call from Kristen Jensen, 47 years old. She frantically reported that her husband, Gerald Jerry Jensen, had gone missing. Kristen had just gone through a rehabilitation program at the VA hospital. She had arranged for Jerry to pick her up on the 20 Honest, but when she was discharged, she repeatedly called his phone only to hear the voicemail. This was not normal. Jerry was a reliable man, never ignored his wife like this. Kristen's intuition told her that something was terribly wrong. Returning home at 5:30 p.m., Kristen found no sign of Jerry, but her daughter Nicole. Her boyfriend, Chris Tomlinson, and their newborn were there. Nicole and Chris said that the night before, Jerry had a heated argument with someone on the phone, and they were worried he would wake the baby, so they went to the library to use the Wi-Fi. When they returned, Jerry had vanished. Initially, Kristen thought her husband simply forgot to pick her up. But then, a series of strange details sent a chill down her spine. Jerry's car was still there, his keys still in the house, his clothes, his phone, all untouched. More importantly, there was a strong smell of bleach when she walked into the house. Looking around, Kristen noticed that the bedroom door was gone, but the bathroom door was still intact. Feeling an intense sense of unease, she immediately called the police to report her husband missing and stated that something terrible had happened. Jerry Jensen was born on November 6, 1959, into a large family with 7 siblings. He made a living as an electrician, but life was not always easy. Jerry's first marriage ended in divorce, and he gradually became accustomed to the life of a divorced man. Everything changed when Jerry had a serious accident that broke his neck. Since then, he became reliant on painkillers to manage his chronic pain. It was during this time that he met Kristen Thornhill, a divorced mother of 3, who also struggled with addiction. Their shared experiences brought them closer. Together, they decided to undergo rehab, hoping to turn their lives around. After spending time together, they married, believing that love and mutual support would help them overcome any difficulties. However, despite Kristen's efforts to recover, the instability in their home left its mark, especially on Kristen's eldest daughter, Nicole. Nicole grew up in a chaotic environment and was soon sent to live with her father. This strained the relationship between mother and daughter for many years. 4 years after Kristen and Jerry's marriage, Nicole, now 18, reached out to her mother to reconnect. She was about to graduate from high school, but when her father lost his job, Nicole was forced to move back in with her mother and Jerry. Not long after moving in, Nicole met Chris Tomlinson on a social media site. Chris, in his early 20s, was stationed in Germany while serving in the military. Their online relationship quickly became serious, and they were eager to be together. At the end of 2006, Chris decided to fly to the U.S. to meet Nicole for the first time. Just 8 months later, Nicole, then 18, surprised everyone by announcing she would move to California to live with Chris, who was 23. Though taken aback by their daughter's decision, Jerry and Kristen did not try to stop her. After moving to California, Nicole and Chris quickly faced the harsh realities of life. They struggled to make ends meet, and then unexpected news came. Nicole was pregnant. At 18 years old, unmarried, and completely unprepared to become a mother, Nicole was panicked, not knowing what to do. When money ran out, and there was nowhere else to go, they were forced to return to live with Kristen and Jerry. Kristen was overjoyed at the birth of her first grandchild, but that joy was short-lived. Just 6 weeks after the baby was born, Kristen had to return to the rehab center for 4 days. Even so, Jerry was always by her side. He visited her every day, and they had planned for him to pick her up when she was discharged. However, when Kristen was released, Jerry did not appear. At first, she tried calling him, but only got the ringing and voicemail. A sense of unease overwhelmed her. Jerry had never broken a promise, especially to her. She immediately contacted the police, but since Jerry had been missing for less than 24 hours, they didn't consider it a serious missing persons case. But Kristen was different. She was sure something terrible had happened. Jerry's keys, phone, clothes, all his belongings were still at home. He couldn't have disappeared without leaving a trace. The question was, if Jerry didn't leave on his own, what had really happened to him? After Kristen Jensen reported her husband missing for over 48 hours, the Stuart, Florida police began searching for traces of Jerry Jensen, 48. According to the testimony of Kristen's daughter and her boyfriend, Jerry had disappeared on the night of April 20 after receiving a mysterious phone call. In an effort to determine whether Jerry had relapsed, investigators asked Kristen if he had confided in anyone. She suggested they talk to Kevin, one of Jerry's closest friends. When questioned, Kevin confirmed that he had spoken with Jerry just 1 day before he went missing. According to Kevin, the biggest issue in Jerry's life was not drugs, but the stress within the family. Jerry had complained that living with Kristen was becoming suffocating, largely due to her daughter's boyfriend, Chris. He was unemployed, refused to work, and had become a burden on the household. This led the police to form an important theory. Could family pressures have pushed Jerry into relapse? When the police followed Kristen on April 25, she admitted that Jerry had started using painkillers again. However, when they checked, they found that the bottle still contained many unused pills, a clear sign that he hadn't disappeared to seek more drugs. Another thing was discovered during her search of the house. The bathroom door had been broken. When she asked Nicole and Chris what had happened, they thought it was something Jerry had done in a fit of rage. The police released Kristen and asked her to stay in touch with any additional information. But investigators could not take any significant steps until more evidence surfaced. Less than a week after Jerry Jensen was reported missing on April 25, 2008, police received a call from Southwest County authorities. A body had just been found at a landfill on Jonah Road. The discoverer was a bulldozer operator who, while working as usual, unexpectedly saw a human arm protruding from the trash pile. The body still had some identifying marks, including tattoos, which helped investigators quickly gather clues. They took the body to the medical examiner's office for fingerprint testing. The results confirmed the victim was Gerald Jensen. Police immediately returned to meet Kristen, Nicole, and Chris to gather more information. When Kristen was informed of her husband's death, she was shocked and panicked. However, since she was in a rehabilitation center at the time Jerry died, the police excluded her from the list of suspects. Now suspicion shifted to the remaining family members. Kristen revealed an important detail. She had once suspected Chris, Nicole's boyfriend. According to her, Chris claimed he had just returned from military service, but never showed her any documents to prove it. Meanwhile, Nicole and Chris provided an ambiguous testimony. They claimed that on the night Jerry disappeared, he received an angry phone call and then ran into the bedroom as if hiding from someone. Then suddenly the bedroom door was kicked down and a violent attack took place. Who called Jerry on that fateful night? And what really happened behind the bedroom door? While the police interrogated the family, Detective Gerwin was working to obtain a warrant to search Gerald Jensen's mobile phone. The most important thing at that moment was to identify who called Jerry, the night he went missing. Once the necessary information was obtained, the investigators brought Nicole and Chris into the interrogation room, starting with Nicole. Knowing that the police had uncovered the truth, Nicole Thornhill decided to confess. She admitted that both she and her boyfriend, Chris Tomlinson, were not getting along with her stepfather, and money could be part of the reason. Initially, they planned to drug Jerry to stage a suicide. But when this plan failed, they turned to a more brutal method, and Kristen's time in rehab provided the perfect opportunity to strike. Nicole testified that around 7 a.m., while Gerald was still sleeping, Chris suddenly attacked him with a samurai sword. Nicole was instructed by Chris to take the baby outside. When she returned, Chris told her, "Jerry is dead." When investigators asked about the sword, Nicole stated it was still under the bed. She also described how they handled the body. They wrapped Gerald in a tarp, then wrapped a blanket from her mother's bed around him before placing the body in the bathtub. After that, they cleaned the bathroom, hallway, and threw all the evidence into the trash. The police immediately went to the apartment to verify Nicole's testimony. Indeed, they found a sword set under the bed, along with suspicious traces in the kitchen. A bottle of tequila with a layer of white powder at the bottom was actually crushed medication. A partially consumed carton of milk also showed signs of being drugged. Notably, police found a receipt from Walmart recorded on April 22, one day after Jerry was murdered. Confronted with this new evidence, Nicole could no longer deny it. Nicole Thornhill has just confessed to the horrific crime. She and her boyfriend, Chris Tomlinson, had conspired to murder her stepfather, Gerald Jensen. But what is even more frightening is that they also intended to kill her mother, Kristen. According to their distorted belief, anyone who uses drugs does not deserve to live, and they did not want people like that around their child. After concluding the interrogation with Nicole, the investigators moved on to Chris. Unaware that Nicole had confessed everything, Chris stuck to a completely different story. But when the police informed him that they had found Jerry's body, Chris's attitude changed dramatically. And when he learned about Nicole's confession, he broke down. Finally, Chris admitted, "We drugged his drink. When he went into the bedroom, he started screaming as if ready to fight. Instinctively, I grabbed a weapon. He charged at me. I kicked him down the hall, but he kept coming at me. I tried to break free, and in the end I stabbed him." Chris also admitted that they initially planned to poison Jerry. If Kristen had not been in the VA rehab center at that time, she might have been the next victim. With 2 confessions and a pile of evidence collected, the prosecutors believed this would be an easy case to close. But just 6 days after being arrested, Nicole made everything much more complicated. Nicole Thornhill had initially confessed, dragging her boyfriend Chris Tomlinson into the plot to murder her stepfather, Gerald Jensen. She even admitted that they had planned to kill her mother, Kristen, as well. But now, after being arrested, Nicole suddenly changed her statement. She claimed she was the victim, that Chris had controlled her, and that she did everything out of fear of him. The problem was that Nicole wasn't even present when the murder occurred. But could that be enough to declare her innocent? Under the law, if she had planned and assisted Chris before or after the crime, she could still be convicted of murder. On May 18, 2010, the trial for Chris Tomlinson began, with the defense arguing self-defense. However, the jury took only 3 hours to reach a verdict. Chris Tomlinson was convicted of first-degree murder. In Florida, a first-degree murder conviction means a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The judge immediately sentenced Chris to life in prison, plus an additional 60 years. A month later, Nicole Thornhill was sentenced. However, a surprising witness appeared, calling for leniency on her behalf, her mother, Kristen. After hearing Kristen's plea, the judge decided not to sentence Nicole to life in prison, but she was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Although justice was served, nothing could bring Jerry back. He had paid the ultimate price with his life. Kristen Jensen passed away in 2020, but before her death, she had tried to mend her relationship with her daughter, though it was too late. A broken family, a brutal murder, and secrets gradually uncovered Laurie Cohn and her daughter Jackie were never truly close. But when tragedy struck Laurie's husband and Jackie's father, Jack Cohn was murdered in his own home, everything changed. Jack was beaten to death in a violent break-in, leaving the two women in shock and grief. At first, the loss seemed to bring them closer. But soon doubts arose and suspicion crept into every conversation. As their relationship fractured, they began to turn against each other. Who was truly behind the murder? As fingers point and accusations fly, the police must unravel buried secrets to uncover the truth. And in moments of desperation, people are capable of things no one could ever imagine. San Bernardino, California to OM, April 2, 2012. A 911 call pierced the quiet night. Jackie Cohn, 23, trembled as she dialed, fearing for her father, Jack Cohn, 64. She and her mother, Laurie Cohn, 47, had just returned home to a horrifying scene, the front door wide open, Jack's truck missing. As Jackie tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher, Laurie rushed inside. Seconds later, she returned, her face pale, snatching the phone from her daughter's hand. Her voice shook with panic. "I can't find my husband." Still holding the phone, Laurie ventured deeper into the dark house, stepping into the back bedroom. She fumbled in the darkness, her eyes scanning the room until they stopped. Jack Cohn lay there, in a pool of blood, beaten to death. When police and paramedics arrived, they quickly realized there was nothing they could do to save Jack Cohn. He had been brutally beaten to death, his hands and feet tightly bound with rope and duct tape, his body covered in wounds. The room reeked of blood, bearing the marks of a violent attack. Jack was not just an ordinary man. He was a licensed gun dealer who owned hundreds of firearms in his home. And now he was dead. At the scene, the police quickly separated Laurie and Jackie for questioning. Laurie, still in shock, said that she and her daughter had been gambling at the casino all night. When they returned home, they found the front door wide open and Jack lying motionless on the bedroom floor. Sitting on the grass in front of the house, Laurie sobbed, her voice breaking as she spoke of her late husband. "He was my best friend." Born in 1965 in California, Laurie Jean Gibson was not the type of woman to easily break down in tears. She was confident, tough, a woman who had learned to survive from a young age. Laurie grew up in poverty and started working at 15 to support herself. But her life truly hit rock bottom in 1984 when she had nowhere to go and not a single penny to her name. At just 19 years old, she wandered through San Bernardino, taking odd jobs to survive. A friend took her in, offering her shelter and even hiring her for household tasks. It was during this time that Laurie met her friend's older brother, a man who would change her life forever. Jack Cohn was 17 years older than Laurie and a modestly successful man. He ran a TV repair shop in San Bernardino, where many locals had brought their televisions for servicing. In addition, Jack was a licensed firearms dealer, a business that provided him with a steady income. He was funny, kind, and generous. Despite his stable career, Jack remained single at 36 until he met Laurie. That changed quickly. Just weeks after they met, Laurie moved in with Jack at his home, which doubled as his repair shop. Jack provided her with a place to stay, and in return, Laurie helped out at the store, answering calls and assisting with daily tasks. What began as an employer-employee relationship soon turned into something more. In 1989, they welcomed their daughter, Jackie, their only child. She became the bond that brought Laurie and Jack closer than ever. Jack adored Jackie, spoiling her unconditionally. As Jackie started school, Laurie took on a bigger role in helping Jack expand his business. Over a decade together, their marriage seemed solid and stable. But even as life appeared peaceful, cracks began to form, especially in Laurie's relationship with her daughter. Jackie, once a daddy's girl, became a rebellious teenager. She got into trouble at school, struggled with authority, and, most notably, had a strained relationship with her mother. While Jack continued to indulge his daughter, Laurie felt increasingly pushed aside, fueling tensions between husband and wife. In the years that followed, Jackie's life spiraled out of control. She married young, had several children, but her marriage failed. Eventually, she turned to drugs, not just using methamphetamine, but also dealing it. In early 2012, Jackie was arrested. Jack was devastated to see his daughter handcuffed and taken away by the police. But when she was released at the end of March, the aging father welcomed her back with open arms, continuing to care for her without hesitation. Surprisingly this time, even Laurie seemed happy to have Jackie back. She decided to put past conflicts aside and invited her daughter out for a night together. The two spent the entire night at the casino, but as they drove home at 4 a.m. on April 2, 2012, a horrifying tragedy awaited them. In the early hours of April 2, 2012, in San Bernardino, California, Laurie Cohn discovered her husband, Jack Cohn, beaten to death inside their home. A brutal murder, but was it a robbery gone wrong or something far darker? When police arrived at the scene, all initial signs pointed to a violent break-in. Someone had entered the house in the middle of the night and encountered Jack. But it seemed the intruders weren't just after ordinary valuables. Jack wasn't just a TV and satellite repairman. He was also a licensed gun dealer who owned hundreds of firearms. In an area rife with gang activity that made him a particularly dangerous target, Jack was not a careless man. He was extremely cautious about protecting his assets and his life. All his firearms were stored in a specially locked room, secured behind a heavy-duty safe door. He had even installed a surveillance camera system, turning his home into a true fortress. But on the night of the murder, none of these security measures mattered. The killers cleaned out the gun room, stole Jack's truck to transport their loot, and even took the DVR containing footage from the surveillance cameras. And yet, there was something strange. The intruders hadn't touched the store's safe, which contained $9,000 in cash. Evidence at the scene suggested Jack had been awakened in the middle of the night. When found, he was still wearing his pajamas. His hands and feet were bound with rope, and his neck had been restrained. It appeared that the attackers had tortured him, trying to force him to open the safe. When he refused to cooperate, they beat him to death. At the crime scene, Laurie and her daughter Jackie seemed completely devastated by Jack's tragic death. They cried, appeared in shock, and struggled to process what had happened. But as the police looked closer, something didn't add up. How had the intruders so easily bypassed Jack's security system? How could a heavily secured home be broken into with no signs of forced entry or significant struggle? Police quickly began to suspect that this wasn't just a random burglary. It might have been an inside job. It didn't take long for them to identify a possible accomplice. The first name on their list of suspects was Jackie. Early information suggested that Jackie might have leaked details about her father's security system to some acquaintances, leading them directly to the house on that fateful night while she and her mother were away. Laurie appeared shocked and confused when she heard this theory. She cooperated with the police, even admitting that she had her own doubts about her daughter. Jackie had a criminal record, a history of drug addiction, and had been involved in multiple troubles before. But when detectives asked Laurie point-blank whether she believed Jackie could have killed her own father, she hesitated. After a moment of silence, Laurie finally said, "She's still Jack's daughter. I don't think she could do it. Even if Jackie was somehow involved, there was a major problem. She had an alibi." Laurie insisted that the two of them had been gambling at the casino all night. This complicated the case for the police. They decided to review surveillance footage from the casino to verify Laurie's story. And the footage confirmed it. Laurie and Jackie had indeed been at the casino, gambling throughout the night. But then Jackie revealed a shocking secret about her mother. Jackie sat there, tears streaming down her face, as she told the police the truth about her parents' marriage, a truth she had long chosen to ignore. "My mother had a gambling problem. When she lost too much, she started pawning my dad's stuff, then selling it outright. But that wasn't the worst part. She was addicted to meth too," Jackie choked out. The police were stunned by this revelation. From the beginning of the case, Laurie had appeared as a grieving wife, shattered by her husband's death. But if what Jackie said was true, Laurie wasn't just a heartbroken widow, she was a woman hiding dark secrets. Jackie continued, "My dad knew about the gambling. They fought about it all the time. But things got worse when my mom lost too much money. He worked so hard his whole life, but she just threw it all away at the casino. The fights got worse, and I think she wanted to get rid of him." The officers listened intently as the pieces of the case started to come together. Could Laurie have been behind Jack's murder? Had she arranged for someone to kill him to cover up her debts and addiction? Jackie had just exposed a completely different narrative, one that could turn Laurie from a witness into a suspect. She recalled a moment that now sent chills down her spine, seeing the name Shauna Bayliss appear on her mother's phone screen, a name tied to a world of crime and drugs. "Shauna called my mom and asked about Jack's keys," Jackie said, her voice trembling. The police immediately understood the significance of this detail. If Shauna had called Laurie to ask about the keys, it was highly likely that Laurie had given them access to Jack's house. And if that was true, this wasn't a random burglary, it was a planned robbery with Laurie's involvement. Jackie went on, "My mom got involved with those people after my dad kicked her out. She had no money, nowhere to go, and they gave her a place to stay in exchange for drugs." The police started piecing the timeline together. Jack had finally had enough and kicked Laurie out of the house. Homeless and desperate, Laurie fell in with criminals and addicts. Over time, she became entangled with them. When Jackie was released from jail, Laurie wanted to mend their relationship, so she took her daughter out for the night on the same night Jack was murdered. But on their way home, Laurie received a call from Shauna, a woman connected to dangerous criminals. If Jackie was telling the truth, Jack's murder wasn't an accident. It was a carefully planned crime. The only question that remained, was Laurie just a pawn in this scheme, or had she orchestrated the entire plan to have her husband killed? On April 4, 2012, more than 48 hours after she called 911 and reported that Jack was dead, police arrested Laurie Cohn for conspiracy to commit murder. That same day, officers knocked on the door of Shauna Bayliss. Just as investigators were handcuffing Shauna, an unidentified man bolted from the back of her house and jumped into a swimming pool. Police pulled him out and identified him as a criminal named Gary Gallion. Once in custody, Gary refused to speak, but Shauna did. She gave up names, revealed key details, and started with a confession, openly admitting her involvement. Shauna stated that Laurie was furious and devastated after Jack kicked her out of the house. That's when she and Gary began plotting the robbery. Shauna also claimed that Laurie had told Gary exactly how to disable Jack's security system. "The first thing you do when you get inside that room is take the DVR," Laurie allegedly instructed. On the night of April 1, Laurie went to a casino to establish an alibi. She was there with her daughter, while Shauna drove Gary to Jack's store. Gary was supposed to steal Jack's truck for his getaway, but the plan hit a snag. Frustrated, he called Shauna and said, "Hey, the gate is locked." Shauna then called Laurie and asked which of Jack's many keys would open the gate. "The green one," Laurie replied. According to Shauna, not long after, Gary arrived at her house with Jack's stolen truck, loaded with stolen goods, TVs, rifles, and more. It was only then, Shauna claimed, that Gary told her Jack had been murdered. On February 26, 2013, at the San Bernardino County Court, Laurie Cohn and Gary Gallion officially stood trial for murder. Both were charged with the killing of Jack Cohn, Laurie's husband, in April of the previous year. Prosecutors argued that Laurie harbored deep resentment after being thrown out of the house, which ultimately drove her to plan her husband's murder. The third accomplice in the conspiracy, Shauna Bayliss, pleaded guilty and cooperated with the authorities. She testified that Laurie had approached her for help in finding someone to carry out the burglary, and that person was none other than Gary Gallion. During the 9 months Laurie was in custody awaiting trial, she changed so drastically that friends and former neighbors barely recognized her. She had lost significant weight and appeared gaunt and pale. The most shocking testimony came from Laurie's daughter, Jackie. Standing before the jury, Jackie recounted how her mother was a compulsive gambler, drowning in debt, and had been kicked out of the house just months before Jack was murdered. Prosecutors argued that this was the breaking point that led Laurie to hatch her deadly plan. Shauna also testified in court, detailing Laurie's involvement from recruiting Gary for the burglary to instructing him on how to bypass Jack's security system. According to Shauna, Laurie made it clear that the first priority was to seize the DVR, ensuring no evidence was left behind. However, Gary made a critical mistake. He hid the DVR in a trash bin near a liquor store in San Bernardino. Police later found it completely intact. Though the footage did not capture Jack's murder, it clearly showed Gary breaking into Jack's gunroom. This meant he had not covered his face or attempted to conceal his identity. And if there were still any doubts about Laurie's motive, another witness stepped forward, Charles Duke. Charles testified that months before Jack's murder, Laurie had directly approached him with a murder-for-hire proposal, offering several $1,000s. His testimony was the final puzzle piece, completing the picture of a meticulously planned crime, not just a random burglary gone wrong. As the trial reached its decisive phase, Gary Gallion stood up, hoping to turn the tide in his favor. He desperately tried to deny all accusations, insisting that he had no involvement in the crime. However, prosecutors swiftly dismantled his lies. They presented a series of undeniable evidence from Shauna Bale's testimony and the recovered DVR footage to Charles Duke's incriminating statement. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Gary was the one who carried out the break-in and murdered Jack Cohn, all according to Laurie's plan. After hours of intense deliberation, the jury finally reached a verdict. They declared that Laurie Cohn had hired Gary Gallion not just to rob, but to kill her husband, all to fund her insatiable gambling addiction. Given the ruthless nature of their crimes, the harshest sentence was handed down: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Laurie Cohn and Gary Gallion would never walk free again. As the courtroom doors closed, the case that had shocked many came to an end. But in its place, a permanent sentence was sealed, one that ensured those who had killed out of greed would never see the outside world again. Karen Newell always knew how to attract men, and her new husband was no exception. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to have it all. Their marriage appeared happy, but just 9 months later, tragedy struck. Her husband was murdered right before her eyes in a brutal robbery. The attackers demanded his wallet, but something felt off. Everything seemed too staged, too perfect to be just a random mugging. Was this truly a simple carjacking? Or was the killer a jealous lover, lurking in the shadows? The deeper the police dug, the more suspicious they became. Was this marriage truly built on love? Or was it from the start a perfect facade to hide a ruthless plan? A plan where the price to be paid was John's life. Orange County, Florida, late night, February 20, 1994. On a desolate highway between Cocoa Beach and Orlando, a car suddenly pulled over. In the dim headlights of passing vehicles, a young woman frantically waved her hands, pleading for help. She approached every car that slowed down, and whenever someone stopped, she uttered only one sentence: "Help me. My husband has been shot." Her name was Karen Newell, and the man lying motionless on the pavement, drenched in blood, was her husband, John. He had been shot multiple times. Several drivers stopped to try and help, but it was too late. When the sheriff arrived at the scene just minutes later, he confirmed what everyone feared: John was dead. According to Karen, that night, she and her husband were driving back home to Orlando after a long day at the beach when their car started having issues. When John stepped out to check under the hood, a small sedan pulled up behind them. 3 men were inside. At first, Karen thought they were stopping to help, but no 2 of them stepped out and immediately demanded John's wallet. Karen recalled that the robbery happened too fast. 1 second, they were simply asking for money, and the next, John collapsed to the ground, shot multiple times. The attackers jumped back into their car, sped off, and left her husband bleeding out by the roadside. But the most horrifying part wasn't just the immediate loss Karen was pregnant. The killers didn't just take John's life. They took away the father of her unborn child. Karen Newell didn't have an easy life. Growing up in hardship left a deep mark on her, but it couldn't extinguish the strong spirit of this young woman. Despite her captivating beauty, Karen's love life was far from smooth. By the end of her 20s, she had already been married and divorced twice. In the spring of 1993, at the age of 28, Karen seemed more focused on her career. The brunette wasn't just striving for success at work, she was also trying her luck in local beauty pageants, hoping to chase her dream of becoming a model. But perhaps Karen's true stroke of luck didn't come from the runway. It came from a small bar in the suburbs of Orlando. That was where she met John Newell. From the first glance, Karen might have been drawn to the tall man with striking blue eyes. But John wasn't just handsome, he was a master mechanic with a good salary, 2 cars of his own, and a decent amount of savings. That night, John took Karen home, but their connection wasn't just a fleeting romance. He was captivated by her beauty, charm, and perhaps something mysterious that set her apart. As for Karen, she too was swept up in the whirlwind romance with John. Before long, their relationship became more serious than ever. On May 22, 1993, just 2 months after their passionate first night, John and Karen decided to get married. Everything happened so quickly, but both seemed to believe they had found their soulmate. After the wedding, Karen excitedly shared with John about a new career opportunity. She claimed that thanks to her connections in the modeling industry, she had landed a job involving television product promotions. This meant a packed schedule, frequent travel, and constant busyness. But Karen reassured her husband that no matter where she went, she would always come back to him. 7 months into their marriage, Karen announced joyful news. She was pregnant with their first child. John was overwhelmed with happiness. He eagerly awaited the moment he would become a father, believing that the baby's arrival would bring them closer than ever. Sean, a close friend of John's, once said that John loved Karen deeply. He always made an effort to keep the romance alive in their relationship. Just days after Valentine's Day in 1994, the couple even planned a short getaway to the beach, a way to enjoy some sweet moments together before their child was born. But no one could have predicted that this would be one of their last moments together. On Sunday morning, February 20, John and Karen packed their bags, got in their car, and drove an hour east to the beach. They spent the entire day enjoying the fresh ocean breeze before heading back to Orlando in the evening. But as they passed the toll booth at exactly 5:28 p.m. and turned onto State Road 520, things took a strange turn. The car suddenly showed signs of malfunction. John and Karen decided to pull over. John stepped out to check, but within seconds, a horrifying event unfolded. Late Sunday night, February 20, 1994, in Orange County, Florida, a brutal murder occurred on a desolate highway outside Orlando. The victim was John Newell, 29, husband of Karen Newell. By the time police arrived at the scene, John was already dead. His distraught wife, Karen, recounted to detectives that their car had broken down, and just as John stepped out to inspect it, a strange vehicle suddenly pulled up beside them. 3 men got out demanding John's wallet, but in the blink of an eye, according to Karen, one of them pulled out a gun and fired multiple shots at her husband. Despite being in shock, Karen was able to provide police with crucial details. She described the attackers' appearances, their car, and even remembered part of the license plate, along with a distinctive bad boy sticker on the rear window. Police immediately issued an urgent alert and launched a manhunt for the killers. Based on the .22 caliber shell casings found at the scene, investigators determined that the 3 suspects were armed and extremely dangerous. However, one odd detail stood out: the assailants had fled so quickly that they left behind John's wallet, the very thing they had demanded in the first place. That night, law enforcement focused on tracking down the car with the bad boy sticker while also heading to the hospital to continue questioning Karen. She was still distraught but lucid enough to answer their questions. A complex case was beginning to unravel. According to Karen's statement, she and John had spent a joyful day at the beach, where they were later joined by a friend named P.J. Giffen. P.J. was not just a friend, but also Karen's assistant, helping her with film production work. After a long day in the sun and waves, the three of them left Karen and John in one car, while P.J. drove separately. On the way back to Orlando, Karen claimed she had been following P.J.'s car, but lost sight of him after passing a toll booth. It was then that her car started malfunctioning, with the steering wheel shaking abnormally. John, a skilled mechanic, told Karen to pull over so he could take a look. Karen stated that they both got out of the car. She walked around to check the wheels, while John inspected under the hood. At that moment, another car suddenly approached from behind. Karen, who was crouched near the front of their vehicle, didn't see everything clearly. Then, gunshots rang out. In the chaos, Karen took cover near the front of the car, confused and terrified by what was happening. She initially thought it was just a robbery, but what she couldn't understand was why the attackers murdered John and then left without taking his wallet. Instead of immediately suspecting the grieving widow of lying, investigators chose to explore other possible leads. Instead of rushing to accuse the newly widowed Karen of lying, investigators decided to broaden their investigation. A police report revealed that not long before John was murdered, there had been an attempted break-in at the Newells' home. Around 9 p.m. that night, as darkness settled outside, Karen heard strange noises coming from the backyard. She immediately alerted John, but as he stepped outside to check, he was suddenly ambushed by two masked men wielding baseball bats. They brutally attacked him, leaving him in a terrible state. Fortunately, a neighbor heard the commotion and turned on their lights, scaring off the assailants. Karen quickly called 911. Though John was not seriously injured, he was unable to provide any useful information beyond the fact that someone had apparently tried to break into their home. At the time, the incident was dismissed as a failed burglary. However, when John was murdered just a few months later, the break-in took on a far more sinister implication. Investigators began interviewing John's friends and family, but no one could point to any known enemies. John was known as a kind-hearted man, always willing to help others. Yet a surprising detail emerged recently. John had taken in a new roommate, none other than Peter P.J. Giffen, Karen's assistant. What raised eyebrows even more was that P.J. had moved in right after the break-in, and according to accounts, it was Karen who had suggested it. "Why don't we let my young assistant move in? He's such a nice guy." John, trusting and easygoing, agreed without hesitation. But now, police began asking a critical question. Was there something suspicious between Karen and P.J.? Was their relationship more than what they let on? And if so, was John's death really a random robbery, or was there a deeper, more calculated crime at play? By late February 1994, a week had passed since Karen Newell had witnessed her husband's murder on a deserted stretch of highway outside Orlando, Florida. She claimed that the robbers had suddenly jumped out of their car, confronted John, and demanded his wallet. However, investigators from the Orange County Sheriff's Office were growing increasingly skeptical of her story. They began questioning the relationship between Karen and Peter P.J. Giffen. Were they really just friends? And was the child Karen was carrying truly John's? Shortly after the murder, police summoned P.J. for questioning. He partially corroborated Karen's story about the three of them spending the day at the beach. P.J. claimed that he had consumed 12 cans of daiquiri, smoked marijuana, and then driven home ahead of Karen and John. But when investigators traveled to P.J.'s hometown of Port St. Lucie and started digging, his story began to unravel. Contrary to Karen's claims, P.J. was not her production assistant. In reality, he was nearly jobless, a high school dropout, drifting aimlessly through life. John's friends had long suspected that P.J. and Karen were involved in something more than just friendship. But what shocked investigators even more was how their relationship had actually begun. In the summer of 1993 on Florida's Turnpike, PJ happened to spot Karen driving alone with a pair of handcuffs in her car. Jokingly, he told her to cuff him. But instead of laughing it off, Karen gave him a sly smile and began flirting with the teenager. Before long, the two had plunged into a secret affair. But while Karen may have seen PJ as nothing more than a reckless fling, PJ believed it was true love. He even told friends that he was married to Karen, an absurd claim, but one that revealed much about his mindset. What intrigued police most was PJ's potential motive. If Karen was pregnant with his child, then John was the only obstacle standing in their way. And if that were true, PJ had every reason to want John gone for good. Although confirming the affair between Karen and PJ provided a clear motive, investigators still needed concrete evidence to link them to the murder. Specifically, they needed to locate the murder weapon, a .22 caliber gun, based on shell casings found at the scene. Over the following days, police questioned the couple's friends, but a shocking revelation came when they spoke with one of Karen's ex-husbands. They discovered something even more suspicious. PJ wasn't the only man Karen had been involved with. She had remained in contact with her ex-husband and had even borrowed a gun from him. At the time, her request seemed reasonable to the former spouse, especially given that John had recently survived a brutal baseball bat attack. But the most incriminating detail? The gun Karen borrowed was a .22 caliber, the exact same type as the murder weapon. A simple ballistics test could confirm if this was the gun used in the killing. However, when police asked Karen's ex to turn over the firearm, they hit a roadblock. Karen had never returned it. Now investigators were certain she was involved in the crime. But rather than rushing to arrest her, they needed ironclad evidence that would hold up in court. As they dug deeper into her past, they unearthed another crucial detail. Back in 1989, Karen had a criminal record for credit card fraud. On February 28, 8 days after her husband's murder, Karen Newell was arrested by the Orange County Sheriff's Office for violating her probation. While she was in custody, investigators continued gathering evidence. They interviewed a man named Louis Aragona, Karen's stepbrother, and uncovered a bombshell revelation. According to Louis, as early as the summer of 1993, Karen had approached him with a chilling proposal. John had a $500 life insurance policy, and she wanted Louis to help plan his murder so she could cash in. Louis refused to take part in the shooting, but he revealed something even more disturbing. Karen had already attempted to kill John in November 1993, with P.J. Giffen as her accomplice. Their plan was to murder John in his own home. However, when P.J. attacked, John cried out in pain, prompting neighbors to turn on their lights and look outside. Fearing exposure, P.J. panicked and fled. Karen didn't give up. Just days after the failed attack, she again reached out to Louis, urging him to help her carry out the plan. Once again, he refused, but P.J., he didn't. This revelation marked a major breakthrough in the investigation. If Louis's account was true, it proved that Karen and P.J. had conspired to kill John long before the supposed random robbery took place. By late March 1994, the case had reached a turning point. Acting on a search warrant, police discovered a safe in John's home, registered in Karen's name. Inside, they found a trove of financial documents, including all of John's life insurance policies. The most shocking find, a $500,000 life insurance policy with Karen as the sole beneficiary. Not only that, but investigators uncovered a damning fact. In the week following John's death, Karen had already begun withdrawing money from the insurance payouts. She showed no signs of grief. Instead, she had swiftly contacted the insurance companies, demanding the money. The evidence was undeniable. This was no random robbery. It was a carefully orchestrated murder for money scheme. On March 28, 1994, less than a month after P.J. Giffen's arrest, both Karen and her teenage lover were officially charged with the murder of John Newell. In the trial of Karen Newell, prosecutors painted a picture of a cunning woman who had planned her husband's murder from the very beginning of their relationship. They argued that Karen had set her sights on John Newell as early as March 1993, not for love, but for his life insurance money. Just weeks after their wedding in May 1993, she secured the first $250,000 policy, then continued adding more over their 9-month marriage. This ensured that when John died, Karen would become rich. But she needed someone else to pull the trigger, and Peter P.J. Giffen was the perfect pawn. According to prosecutors, Karen used her charm to manipulate P.J., a naive young man, turning him into a killer. She promised love, used sex as a weapon, and even lied about being pregnant with his child to deepen his involvement in the plot. But that lie unraveled the night John was killed. When Karen was taken to the hospital, doctors ran a pregnancy test. It was negative. Even more damning, her medical records revealed that she had previously undergone tubal ligation, making pregnancy impossible. With this mountain of evidence, prosecutors were convinced that Karen was not just guilty of murder, she was a cold-blooded mastermind willing to do anything to get what she wanted. They sought the death penalty. The final piece of evidence came from P.J. Giffen's own testimony. Facing the possibility of a death sentence, he broke his silence in the interrogation room. He confessed everything: the affair, the murder plot, and how Karen had manipulated him into carrying it out. According to P.J., after their failed attempt to kill John with a baseball bat in November 1993, Karen immediately devised a new plan. On February 20, 1994, she, John, and P.J. spent the day at the beach, enjoying themselves as if nothing was wrong. But on the drive back to Orlando, she created the perfect opportunity for P.J. to strike. Karen drove ahead while P.J. followed in his own car. After passing a toll booth, Karen pretended to have car trouble. She told John they needed to pull over and check the vehicle. As they stopped on the roadside, P.J., with the murder weapon in hand, approached. Without hesitation, he aimed the gun at John's head and said, "Consider this a divorce." Then he pulled the trigger. John collapsed, but P.J. didn't stop. He fired 3 more shots into John's chest, ensuring he was dead. P.J.'s confession not only sealed Karen's fate, but also led investigators to the most critical piece of physical evidence: the murder weapon. He revealed that after the killing, he had tossed the gun into a lake a few miles from the crime scene. When police searched the designated area, they found the weapon. Ballistics tests confirmed it was the gun that fired the fatal bullets, but the most damning evidence? The gun's serial number matched the firearm Karen had borrowed from her ex-husband before the attack. This directly linked her to the murder weapon, proving she had orchestrated every detail of her deadly plan. With P.J.'s testimony, the recovered gun, and a clear financial motive, prosecutors had everything they needed to charge Karen with first-degree murder. Karen Newell's case was no longer a mystery. She had not only manipulated a teenager into killing for her, but had also calculated every move to ensure her plan's success. But would she receive the death penalty as prosecutors hoped? That decision lay in the hands of the jury. Facing overwhelming evidence, Karen Newell had no choice but to take a plea deal to avoid execution. The agreement between her defense and prosecutors spared her from the death sentence, but sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for P.J. Giffen, despite being the one who pulled the trigger, his cooperation with authorities earned him a reduced charge of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison, a price for being manipulated into Karen's deadly scheme. The case closed with both conspirators behind bars, but the tragedy remained. A man lost his life, all because of greed and the betrayal of a wife he had trusted. Kimberly Parker and her husband Elahu once had a bright future. They were deeply in love, and the dreams ahead seemed endless. But then on a fateful day, Elahu disappeared. He didn't show up for work. No one saw him. His phone was silent, not a single trace. The police got involved. Theories were raised. Had he left on his own? Was he kidnapped? Had he met with a mysterious accident? As clues slowly emerged, the question was no longer just where is Elahu, but also what role did Kimberly play in all of this? Louisville, Texas, July 31, 2000. Sergeant Greg Striblin arrived at the Louisville recruitment station at 7:30 a.m., just like any other day. But this morning, something felt off. One of his young Marines, Elahu Parker, who was always punctual, had yet to show up. At first, it seemed like it could be just a minor delay, but as time passed with no news from Elahu, worry began to build. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. Elahu's superiors and colleagues started feeling uneasy. Deciding not to wait any longer, Sergeant Striblin drove to Elahu's apartment. He knocked on the door. No response. An eerie silence filled the air. Without hesitation, Striblin tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. He stepped inside cautiously. The apartment looked normal, but then something made him stop in his tracks. The TV was still on. A chilling sensation crept down his spine. Looking around, he noticed the security system of the apartment complex. The uneasy feeling in his gut grew stronger. Sergeant Striblin wasted no time. He called the police and officially reported Elahu Parker's disappearance. But when the police reached out to Kimberly Parker, Elahu's wife, her reaction left everyone stunned. She did not seem worried about her missing husband. The only thing Kimberly cared about was not where Elahu was, but where his car had gone. Born in 1977, Kimberly Hawkins grew up in a peaceful childhood in San Diego. She was a hard-working, sociable girl with good academic performance. When she graduated from high school, a promising future seemed to await her. On a fateful day at Disney World, during a double date, Kimberly met Elahu Parker, a young man who had just finished high school. They were quickly drawn to each other, sharing joyful moments that seemed like something out of a romantic story. But there was an obstacle. Elahu had just joined the Marine Corps and was about to be deployed overseas. A year later, while stationed in the Pacific, Elahu had not forgotten Kimberly. He was captivated by her intelligence and independence. While Elahu was fulfilling his military duties, Kimberly was building her own future, working and attending a vocational school. Their relationship endured through letters, rushed phone calls, and brief moments together whenever Elahu was on leave. Then one day, in front of Kimberly's family, Elahu got down on one knee and proposed. She was stunned. Kimberly's parents were worried that it was too soon for their daughter to enter marriage. But they couldn't deny one thing. Elahu was a good man, and Kimberly loved him deeply. The Marine Corps held Elahu Parker in high regard. 2 days after his wedding in May 1999, he was promoted to sergeant and assigned as a recruiter, a major step forward in his career. Elahu was on a promising trajectory. In April 2000, the Parkers moved to Texas, opening up new opportunities. Kimberly quickly adapted to a new life, even impressing her husband's superiors. Despite the usual challenges of newlyweds, they gradually settled in a private apartment, a new job for Kimberly at Silverleaf Telemarketing in Carrollton, Texas. This job not only provided her with extra income, but also gave her a sense of independence. But Kimberly didn't stop there. Less than 2 months after arriving in Louisville, they had bought a house and a car, all signs of a bright beginning. Yet, instead of enjoying married life with Elahu, Kimberly was about to become the central figure in a tense missing person investigation. The police would launch a frantic search for her suddenly vanished husband, and as the hunt for Elahu progressed, shocking truths about Kimberly's marriage would come to light. On Tuesday morning, August 1, it had been over 24 hours since Elahu Parker failed to show up for work. A missing Marine was no ordinary occurrence, but what caught investigators' attention even more was the strange reaction of his wife, 23-year-old Kimberly Parker. When police contacted Kimberly, she seemed indifferent to her husband's disappearance. While friends and colleagues worriedly searched for him, the only thing she cared about was the whereabouts of Elahu's car. Subsequent investigations revealed a troubling reality. Their seemingly happy marriage had fractured just 6 weeks in. Though separated, Elihu continued paying Kimberly's rent, and they even shared use of his car. But according to Elihu's colleagues, this arrangement quickly became a source of conflict. Elihu began to suspect that Kimberly wasn't the only one driving the car. When he confronted her, a heated argument erupted. Afterward, Kimberly started hiding the car, forcing Elihu to sneak around to find it. Their cat-and-mouse game stretched on for days. But then, within a week, their dispute over the car suddenly reached a breaking point. On July 27, 4 days before Elihu Parker disappeared, a strange incident occurred. That day, 2 young men showed up at the recruitment office where Elihu worked. But they weren't there to enlist. Instead, they demanded access to Elihu's car. When he refused and told them they'd have to wait until he was off duty, the situation escalated quickly. According to Elihu's colleagues, one of the men openly threatened to kill him right in front of them. The tension was only diffused when an officer arrived at the scene, and the 2 men left without further action. At first glance, the incident seemed like nothing more than a meaningless confrontation. But 4 days later, Elihu mysteriously vanished. Investigators couldn't ignore the suspicious coincidence. Who were those 2 men? Why were they after Elihu? What did they really want? Yet as police revisited the incident, they discovered a major problem. No one had recorded the identities of the 2 men. When investigators arrived at Kimberly Parker's apartment and knocked on the door, they immediately noticed a stark change. This time, Kimberly was no longer indifferent to her husband's disappearance as she had been before. Instead, she appeared anxious, flustered, and extremely uncooperative, an unusual reaction for a wife whose husband had just vanished. Standing firmly in the doorway, she was clearly trying to prevent the investigators from entering. But what caught the police's attention even more were the 3 men inside the apartment. When asked to provide identification, their identities were quickly confirmed. Damien Huckabee, 22 years old, along with his 2 friends, Dexter Hodge and Kendall Watson. None of them appeared to be law-abiding citizens. Their evasiveness only heightened the investigators' suspicions. When one of the officers took out a camera and started taking pictures of them, the atmosphere in the apartment grew tense. Despite Kimberly's attempts to cover things up, the police had gotten what they needed. After leaving the apartment, they headed straight to the recruitment office where Elihu Parker worked to continue following the trail. When the photos were shown to Elihu's colleagues, one statement sent chills down the investigators' spines. "That's him, no doubt. That's Damien Huckabee. He's the one who threatened to kill Elihu right here just 4 days ago. And that very day, a call from the Smith County Sheriff's Office in East Texas confirmed their worst fears. A body had just been pulled from the Sabine River. A fisherman had accidentally discovered a floating corpse the day before in a remote area of East Texas. When authorities arrived and retrieved the body from the water, one thing was immediately clear: this was no accident. The victim's hands and feet were tightly bound with duct tape, the body wrapped in plastic wrap, clear signs of a deliberate murder. Upon searching the body, investigators found an identification card still in the victim's pocket. The name on the card left everyone stunned: Elihu Parker. He was no longer missing, but the investigation was far from over. An even more shocking discovery was made: a fatal gunshot wound to Elihu's chest. Police were beginning to uncover the horrific details of Elihu Parker's final moments. On August 3, 2000, Louisville police grew increasingly suspicious that 23-year-old Kimberly Parker knew more about her husband's disappearance than she was willing to admit. From the start, she had been evasive, refusing to answer questions. But did this mean she was directly involved in the crime, or was she simply trying to protect the real killer? When investigators received confirmation that Elihu Parker's body had been found, they immediately went to Kimberly's apartment with a new set of questions. Right there, they told her the truth: her husband was dead. Kimberly was shocked, her reaction unexpected. But was it genuine emotion, or just a well-rehearsed act? After calming down, Kimberly was asked to come to the police station for further questioning. But she wasn't the only one being summoned. 3 other men suspected of involvement in the case were also taken in for interrogation. Damien Huckabee, 22, along with his 2 friends, Dexter Hodge and Kendall Watson. Notably, Damien was no stranger to the case. Just 4 days before Elihu vanished, he had a tense confrontation with him at the recruitment office and even threatened to kill him in front of multiple witnesses. At the police station, Kimberly finally admitted that she knew Damien Huckabee through her job at the telemarketing company. They weren't just co-workers. Damien and Kimberly had grown close. In fact, they had even been romantically involved during the period when Kimberly and Elihu were briefly separated. However, despite admitting to this, Kimberly insisted that their relationship had nothing to do with Elihu's disappearance or death. But was her word trustworthy? Or was this just a clever cover for a far darker conspiracy? On July 30, according to Kimberly, she spent the entire evening with Damien Huckabee and his group of friends because Elihu was absent. She claimed that they went to see a movie at Grapevine Mills Mall while Elihu was not there. When the police interrogated Damien, Dexter, and Kendall, all 3 provided a similar story. They had gone to a shopping mall. However, there was a major flaw in their statements. They could not agree on which shopping mall they had actually visited. Noticing this inconsistency, the investigators decided to put pressure on Damien. When confronted, he could not deny that he was the one who had threatened to kill Elihu in front of his colleagues at the recruitment office. However, he insisted that the incident had nothing to do with the murder. But then, Damien revealed an important name, the man who had accompanied him to the recruitment office that day, Marcus Brown. Investigators immediately dug deeper, and suspicious truths began to emerge. Marcus Brown lived in Smith County, not far from where Elihu's body was discovered. This could not be a mere coincidence. 5 days later, the Smith County Sheriff's Office tracked down Marcus, who was identified as the 5th member of this dark conspiracy. When brought into the interrogation room, Marcus, a large man who appeared slow-witted but was actually dangerous, admitted that he had been with Damien on the day of the confrontation with Elihu at the recruitment office. However, that was not all Marcus confessed. He also told investigators that Damien and his friends had spent the following days plotting something. He did not just tell the police that Damien and his friends conspired to kill Elihu. He claimed that Kimberly was the mastermind behind the entire plan. According to Marcus's testimony, Kimberly had plotted to kill Elihu to claim his $200 insurance policy. She was not just the mastermind, she had also directly helped the killers gain access to Elihu's apartment complex. Marcus recounted that on that fateful night, he, Damien, Dexter, and Kendall hid in the shadows while Kimberly called Elihu out from the apartment complex gate. Without any suspicion, Elihu stepped out, unaware that the wife he trusted was leading him into a trap. As soon as Elihu appeared, the group of assassins rushed into his apartment. Elihu fought back fiercely, but the struggle suddenly ended when Damien pulled out a gun, forcing Elihu into submission. According to Marcus, after subduing Elihu, the group dragged him outside, stuffed him into the trunk of a Honda Civic, and drove straight to East Texas. Kimberly did not go with them. She had already played her part. Marcus testified that when they reached Smith County, he began to fear that he himself might be eliminated just like Elihu. He demanded that Damien drop him off, leaving the group before things took a worse turn. But who was the one who pulled the trigger and killed Elihu? Marcus claimed that he did not know exactly where Elihu was murdered or who fired the fatal shot. That night, the Smith County authorities arrested Marcus on charges of kidnapping. The next morning, on August 9, Louisville police once again knocked on Kimberly's door, but this time they had a warrant for her arrest. As they entered, they discovered Damien, Dexter, and Kendall hiding in a back bedroom, curled up under blankets, trying to conceal their presence. All 4 were handcuffed, despite Kimberly's fierce resistance as she screamed and struggled. In the interrogation room, Kimberly remained silent, refusing to cooperate and demanding a lawyer. But Kendall and Dexter were different. When investigators revealed that Marcus Brown had confessed to everything, the two quickly started talking. Both confirmed Marcus's testimony. Kimberly was the first to propose killing Elahu. She had meticulously planned the ambush, clearing the way for the killers to act. They also confirmed an even more horrifying truth. When they arrived in Smith County, Marcus had been left behind, while the rest of the group drove deeper into a remote forest. There, Elahu begged for his life, but Damien was unmoved. A cold-blooded gunshot ended Elahu Parker's life. After the execution, Dexter and Kendall testified that they left the body in the forest overnight. But the horror wasn't over yet. The next morning, they returned to dispose of the corpse. And that was when they discovered a chilling truth. Elahu was still alive. Not giving him another chance, they wrapped duct tape around his arms, legs, and torso, then threw him into the river, letting the water carry everything away. On June 12, 2001, Kimberly Parker's trial officially began in Denton County, Texas. She was prosecuted for aggravated kidnapping and murder in connection with the disappearance and death of her estranged husband, Elahu Parker, a U.S. Marine. As the prosecution began its opening statement, they exposed the true nature of Kimberly Parker, portraying her as a manipulative and sociopathic mastermind. They argued that everyone involved in the case was part of a premeditated murder plot, a scheme orchestrated entirely by Kimberly Parker. However, the defense painted a completely different picture. They claimed Kimberly was an innocent victim, caught in a plan she had no knowledge of. Instead of blaming Kimberly, the defense attacked Damien Huckabee, asserting that he was the true mastermind behind the kidnapping and murder. But Damien had no intention of helping Kimberly avoid conviction. While awaiting trial for aggravated kidnapping, he refused any plea deals in exchange for testifying against his girlfriend. That did not discourage the prosecution. They had a more crucial witness, Marcus Brown. On the witness stand, Marcus Brown reaffirmed his previous confession, detailing how Kimberly Parker recruited 4 men to participate in the murder plot. He testified that Kimberly was the one who told the group about the $200,000 Marine Corps insurance policy, which she believed would be hers once Elahu was dead. When it was the defense's turn, they made the bold decision to put Kimberly on the witness stand. As expected, Kimberly completely denied Marcus's testimony, claiming it was all lies. Kimberly Parker took the stand, calmly recounting her version of events. She insisted that everything spiraled out of control the moment Damien Huckabee and his accomplices stormed into Elahu's apartment. According to Kimberly, Damien pulled out a gun, and at that moment, she knew things would not go as originally planned. She testified that Damien and his accomplices forced Elahu down the stairs and locked him in the trunk of a car. Kimberly claimed she did not participate in the crime. On the contrary, she said Damien even dropped her off as she requested and reassured her that everything would be fine. But the horrifying truth hit her the next day when Damien came to see her and casually confessed, "We killed him." Kimberly claimed she was shocked and furious. When the two returned to her apartment, an argument erupted, quickly escalating into a physical altercation. According to her testimony, Damien pulled out a gun again, this time pressing it against her head. He kept asking me if I would dare betray him, Kimberly testified in court. And that, according to Kimberly, was why she never went to the police about the murder. However, the prosecution was not about to let her escape justice. In their closing argument, they painted a completely different picture. Kimberly was not a victim, but the mastermind of this brutal murder. Who would the jury believe? On June 14, 2001, the jury reached its final verdict. Kimberly Parker was guilty. The courtroom fell silent as the judge handed down the sentence, 99 years in prison for Kimberly, effectively ending any chance of freedom for the rest of her life. Damien Huckabee and Kendall Watson, the 2 men directly involved in the murder, received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, Dexter Hodge, who agreed to cooperate with authorities, received a lighter sentence, 40 years in prison. The door closed on all those involved. The shocking case finally came to an end. But the price paid was the life of an innocent man.